Hello and welcome to the second session of Erfan Halgheh's second course. Today we're gonna start our theoretical discussions on definition of the cycle of Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un, which means we belong to God and to Him we are returning. The stages of recognition of God, unipolar universe and dipolar universe, constant observer and in motion observer, the definition of beyond time and beyond space, protected tablet, destiny, God's will, definition of inshallah, definition of jab, predestination and free will, and the different types of jab and ma'rifat and irfan, as well as cross law. Let's delve into the material. The first topic we're going to talk about is the notion of inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. You see it up here. I put the original Arabic verse and some English letters that you can pronounce it and know how it sounds like. And we're going to talk about what does it mean and what are the explanations in Erfan Halgheh in terms of the generality of dipolar universe and the journey that we have. This verse is one of the verses in Quran that usually used when individuals are dealing with death or some sort of accident like that. Usually, individuals are associating something horrible or difficult or painful when they hear this verse. When we look at the deeper meaning of the verses, including this and the ones that come before, we realize that the word that associated with the natural disasters or difficulties of life or anything to do with so-called wrath of God are not necessarily uh, what is being interpreted as a painful and destructive notion. There's a concept of musibat, and musibat is associated with any wrath of God or natural disaster or a loss. But when you look at the deeper meaning of it, it means anything that impacted us, anything that affected us. When we look at deeper to the definition of musibat, we realize that musibat is anything that is impacting us. So in that way, birth is also musibat. The marriage is also musibat. The graduation is also musibat. So anything that it can impact us in a way, it's a musibat. It's a force of impact. Now, the reason that we are discussing this verse is that it defines and explains a general motion of the journey of Kamal from the moment of creation and to the end of it, and explains some subtleties and implication as a result of these verse, as well as its synchronization and alignment in terms of its core definition with the Erfan Halgheh. So the meaning of this Halgheh is not whenever that we are in pain or in loss or someone is dead, we should remember God, but rather anything that is impacting us, which is throughout the life, everything is actually have impacts on us. So then we are remembering God and having a relationship with Him in all the circumstances of life, not just in difficulties of life, but as well as the happy moments in life. So after the individuals hearing this verse, especially if they're Muslim or lived in Muslim countries, what they remember or what they associate with is death. But it is important to understand that it's not necessarily resembling that notion only, but there are a lot of deeper factors in that notion. The deep factor is that the implication of we are from Him and we are returning to Him is giving us a diagram like the one you see here. So we have emotion descending, inna lillah, we are from Him, and then we have this pivotal moment that we are returning to Him, and that is ilayhi raji'un. So this notion of inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un is implying some sort of insurance and guarantee of return and that unification. So there are a lot of implication of that notion if we take a deeper look into what it means. In this verse, there's no exception. It doesn't say some people might return to Him and some people not, or only sublime or spiritually grown or prophets or decent humans only return. There is no exception. So basically, anyone is returning to Him. Now, when you think about it, there are some other verses in Quran or other monotheistic religious scriptures that is also talking about hell, where the individuals are going to be eternally in there. So then the questions becomes what happens to individuals that going to go to hell if there is a stage of hell after life, or does those people gonna also be united with God? So if so, what would be the difference between the individuals that they lived a good life and the individuals that they didn't? Usually, when we think about the process and the stages after life, this is the type of chart we're looking at. We're looking at God, and there is a birth on earth. And then, if you're a good person or if you're a bad person, we eventually die. We go to an intermediary stage called barzakh, and then we have the afterlife. Now, in the afterlife, there is a process of judgment. If you've done good, you go to paradise. If you didn't do well, then we go to hell. And then the people that are in hell are going to be eternally there. But this doesn't really add up with the notion of returning, because then this model would imply that some of the individual that didn't do well is going to get stuck here, and only some would be able to go back. It would imply that as if God would just create something and make it so difficult to have some people fail, so then it filters some of them and get them stuck in this infinite, eternal state of darkness and misery. So that renders God as a very sadist and definitely not ultimate God, because then it makes him needy in terms of it had to create something to filter some of its impurity and then get rid of it, so then the only pure parts can return. That also goes against the definition of God, which is supposed to be needless, the ultimate of knowing. Nothing should impact its existence, nothing should add anything to existence, and so on. So none of these analogies would really add up to the notion. That's why we are re-examining these notions, and Erfan Halgheh is giving us a different way to look at it and see what the true definition of these notions and implications are, and adjusting some misinterpretations throughout the history of certain esoteric notions. The notion of inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un is assuring us that there is a return. Under no circumstances that return is disturbed. So basically, no one can really be stuck in any stage and have their process of returning and merging with God be disturbed eternally. Now, there are some other questions that we face, And that is, if that's the case, and if everyone gonna go merge with God, regardless of what they've done throughout their life, whether they were a good person or a not good person, then why would it matter for an individual to try so hard to become a decent human being if anyone's going to eventually merge with God? The question can be answered in an analogy, and that is, imagine there is a train that is on the track going toward the destination. Regardless of who's operating how within that train will reach the destination. Now, people can be decent human beings on the train or not. They can enjoy the journey or not. They can learn and acquire knowledge that would be useful to increase and elevate their quality and spiritual maturity, or just waste their time doing things that are redundant. But regardless, the train is aiming to the destination. The difference is the quality in which the individuals are going through the journey. So some people are in a very optimal circumstances. Let's say they have a seat, or they have a or they have a designated room for themselves. So the quality of their journey is dependent on how and what type of knowledge they acquired, or based on how they are operating. So the quality of the individuals going through the afterlife stages is dependent on whether they have the Kamal knowledge or not. By looking at this picture, we can understand that our journey here on earth is not the beginning and initial point of the journey. So if we were in the initial moment of the journey, we should have been here. But we are not quite there. The reason that we know that is because even among twins, we don't see the exact same behavior and operation and characteristic, even if they are the twins that formed from the split of one fertilized egg. The twins that are born as a result of one fertilized egg are sharing exact genes. Even so, they will not have exact same characteristic, and their identity, their operation, even very, very early on, are different. That indicates that the individuals are operating based on already programmed software, which then implies some sort of information gathered from an experience. And that also indicates that the beginning of the journey of dipolar universe is not here on Earth. So if you want to point out where we at, hypothetically, we are somewhere here at about 7 or 8 o'clock cycle. And here at the very bottom of the cycle, which there is the maximum opposition in dipolar universe, I'll get to that in a moment, because there's also the initial point where there's minimum opposition in dipolar universe. That's the initial time where the justice would imply that everyone should be in the same circumstances in terms of information and operation. Imagine if there is a marathon, the initiation of the game starts from one line. So everyone is behind the line, and then when it's the time to start, then they start. After a while, some might be more further than the other. But the fact that not all of the individuals being born on Earth are not starting from same line indicates that we are not actually starting from the zero line on Earth. This is only one of the reasons that we conclude such a notion. That aside, the motion in which we are going through the cycles each life has its own unique attributes. Here on Earth, we are bound by various different dimensions. For example, we have opposition and space and time. And next life, when we die, we will lose the space dimension and we will enter a life that would be only bound by the opposition and time dimension, which we call it beyond space. In Farsi, we call it Faramakon. And here on Earth, where we are right now, we are dealing with three dimension, which is opposition, black and white, day or night, good and evil, unity, multiplicity, etc. And space, which are body and the limitation of being in any given space based on certain time. So for us to get somewhere, it takes time. And then the time. Before this life, we were dealing with another dimension, which we can't really comprehend it since we lost it. We just know that every life we are losing one dimension, and knowing that it would imply that the previous life should have had another dimension. And then we don't know how many lives we lived from that initial point at the very bottom of the cycle. It's called also Asfal as-Safilin, which is also a reference in Quran as the lowest level in the cycle. And the description of conscious observer, not humans, when I say conscious observer, is an observer that is able to be on a journey of Kamal. We will get to that in depth. So the observer that starts the journey is not a human being, but it is a conscious observer and capable of journey of Kamal. So from here, that started the journey. There were the sets of attributes based on the limiting dimensions, and we don't know how many of those dimensions were because we don't know how many lives we lived up to our world. So our world here on Earth, we know that there was absolutely and definitely one before us, but we don't know how many from then on to that initial point. And from our life and the death after, the other cycles, other stages we will discuss later. What are these stages that we go through? Entire quality of the journey from the very bottom of the cycle to that merging point, the individuals are experiencing some sort of quality in any stages. So let's say an individuals that in this life are dealing with more aggression on their tendency, more difficulty with being enthusiastic or being fascinated by some quality aspects of life, they have more difficult time uh, to be able to operate optimally in the world, interacting with others, with nature, with existence, with themselves, so on. So the quality of their experience in any given stage, any given life, is dependent on how much of Kamal orientation and how much of a quality awareness and Kamal oriented divine knowledge they have. But if they don't, then it would put them in a more difficult situation, as well as, I'm not going to get into that right now, but when we discuss what happens in the next lives, you realize that the experience in which these individuals would have, let's say in hell, would be completely different, and comparing to other individuals that are processing that. In terms of the experience of the observer being optimal, being in an optimal state and optimal operation, aligned with the philosophy of existence, would give them more optimal operation, more optimal state to navigate in each of these stages, regardless of what stage of the journey they are. They could be at the bottom here, or they could be at the top. But the experience of the individual and how easy and smooth that experience is depending on the knowledge of Kamal. So that indicates if an individual would operate non-harmoniously with natural laws, then they would have a difficult time in any of these stages that comparing to the other individuals. Just like an individual that is going through the grades of school, and if they don't study well, then even if they pass, they will have more difficult time to catch up and operate within the next grade. Now, when it comes to hell, which the individuals are having to face with their deficiencies and the lack of awareness and misalignments, in a stage in which feels eternal, the difficulty of processing that is so much different than an individuals that operated much better. So the fact that we will go merge with God regardless of our actions and deeds doesn't justify doing those acts, because then we need to process them in different stages. It would alter not only our quality of operation and experience in each given life, as well as others. And also, we need to process that in hell, which I will get to that later in fourth course in depth. But in there, we learn that the eternal experience in hell is under the awareness that what we have supposed to be operating based on and what have we done, and there is no one actually a judge or someone to blame or punish us, but rather we are facing our own deficiencies in the highest optimal awareness eternally. And that becomes really, really difficult process for someone to have the more non-harmonious operation they operated based on. So that's the difference between an individual operating harmoniously and non-harmoniously. Now, given the fact that this entire cycle is happening in a timelessness beyond time, all the occurrences within the cycle happen in a 0 second, in a matter of second less. So all the information contained in this cycle, all the history, everything that individuals have done and will be doing after us will be recorded and is already in the protected tablet. And that opens up our discussion to predestination and free will. This is a protected tablet here at the beginning of the cycle. We have an observer in which is beyond time and space and opposition. And we have an observer that goes through the cycle and starts the journey right here and goes through certain lives and experiences to gain enough knowledge to comprehend and understand and innate comprehend the philosophy and the purpose of creation, and to be ready to access the treasure box of beloved's attributes, to be able to embody those attributes. And it arrives up here. Now imagine hypothetically for the in motion observer to take 8 billion years to go through the cycle. How long would it take for the other observer to see that finishing? Because the observer is out of time, then there is no amount that it will take for that observer to see the result of the cycle. The observation of God, in which is the ultimate knower and knows everything about anything that happens, is based on this notion that the time for the emotion observer exists, whereas the time for the other observer the observation of God does not exist. So it doesn't matter how long for the observer number one or the in motion observer to experience the entirety of the cycle. For the other observer outside of it, it would just take a matter of seconds. Not only if it would take 8 billion years for the in motion observer to go through this, even if the in motion observer had to go through that 8 billion years 8 billion times, still for the observer beyond time would be in a matter of 0 seconds. So the protected tablet is containing all the details of all the lives that we are not even aware of right now. For example, we don't know what happened in a previous life, but what we have with us is the conclusion and the result of the lives we lived and the experiences that we had. The conclusion and the result, the fruit of those experiences, which is the collection of the amount of knowledge of Kamal that we mentioned. It is the only knowledge transferable to the future lives. We have, we carry, but we don't know how we access them. All those information are within that protected tablet. So this world, it is only a very, very small portion of this massive journey in the dipolar universe. All that is within our cosmos, our world, our physical universe is just a tiny dot in this vast journey of dipolar universe. As I mentioned, the next life, we're going to drop this space dimension and we are no longer bound by the limitation of space. The life after that, we will also lose the time dimension, which makes the past, present, and the future all collide, and the experience of eternity is present. We will discuss about all the details in fourth course. We should pay attention that when we talk about previous life and next life, we don't believe in incarnation in the sense that we are going to be born again on earth. The experience of earth is unique and happens only one time. And in the previous lives and next life, the name of the conscious observer is not humans anymore because there is no earth in there. The operation and the aspects of that existence are completely different comparing to here. So after death, all of our bodies dies except the mental body, which contains all our memories. And after that, the mental body also dies, and we move on to the next journey, lighter and lighter. Just like imagine you're driving a very big truck, and then you reach a destination, you drop it off, you take your car and you drive to a certain destination and you drop it and you take your bike and you ride to the destination and then you drop it off and then you start walking. Every single time that you leave those vehicles, you feel lighter and more flexible in terms of movement, etc. So what we are experiencing here, it's a one-time unique experience on Earth that's never gonna happen. It has been said in the moment of creation that Adam had a bite of that forbidden fruit and was sent to the Asfalosafilin, which is the ultimate inferior stage of the dipolar universe, where is the maximum multiplicity and the farthest point, the most separated part from beloved, to the very depth of dipolar universe. And that's where the experience is in the heaviest and the hardest in terms of operation. The story that we hear from Adam in Bible and in Quran from the moment of creation is not a phenomenon that happened on earth, but rather the creation of Adam happened somewhere beyond time and space. The first human that walked on Earth and was capable of asking, who am I? What am I here? Why am I here? And where did I come from? And who's the creator? Is the first Adam, is the part of the unified body of Adam. In fact, we are all the cells of the unified body of Adam. And therefore, in Farsi, we called Adam Adam, and the fractals of or the cells of the body of Adam as Adamizad, or we found the term for it Adamians. So none of us would be the Adam, but rather the cells of Adam, and we are the Adamians. So the combination of all Adamians throughout the history, infinite past and infinite future, as well as other lives combine, past lives and future lives, would constitute the body of Adam, and that would be the unified body of Adam. Adam is that in motion observer that in 0 second, the beginning of the creation, went through the cycle and came back fulfilling the philosophy of creation. So in the cycle of Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un, we have two observers. We can define these two observers based on certain attributes. The constant observer in unipolar universe, where there is no time, no space, and no opposition, is beyond anything that we can define here. And an emotion observer, Adamians, that are in the experience, in the journey, in the different dimensions of dipolar universe. Now, on our world, this observer is called humans, which is based on space, time, and opposition. Here, as you can see, our life being bound by these three dimensions, it gives its particularity of experience. Now, before we had that extra dimension, which we don't know what it was, we can't really have any knowing of it because it's completely out of our capacity to understand since we lost its dimension. But we will be able to experience some of the experience of afterlives through halqehs and connections, and experience what it would feel like if you would not have body. In the beginning of the cycle, Adam was separated from God for a specific purpose and for a philosophy of a creation, which in a short explanation would be fulfilling the kamal, embodying the attributes, gaining experience in order to be able to access the treasure box of God's attributes and to be able to become just like God. In order to do that, we need to go through certain stages and experience certain qualities to be able to become mature enough to access those operations. We will get into that later in the course. As we were discussing, the questions that how much it would take for God, an observer outside of the dipolar universe, not being bound by any of these dimensions, happens in a 0 second. So from the moment that Adam was created, had a bite of that forbidden fruit, sent all the way down to the beginning of the cycle, and starting years of life in each of these cycle, let's say that 8 billion years all the way up, would only take a matter of 0 second for God to observe. Now, no matter how many times he had to do this, but each time would be a new experience and all would happen in a 0 second. We're also going to discuss about all those details in future course. So the faulty interpretation of the notion of dying and going to either hell or paradise based on our deeds is a very simplified way of interpreting afterlife, and it's not really synchronized and aligned with the quality states of God and the notions regarding the philosophy of creation. So, this type of model would cause a lot of issues with the operation of God and can result a lot of oppositions and antagonism of individuals with the philosophy of creation, not being able to know why all this happened and what happens if the individuals are operating in a certain way, whether they giving themselves hard time here to do their best to become a good person, or someone that they just don't care and they also hurt others and there wouldn't be any consequences. By knowing this model is not adding up to the whole philosophy of creation can help individual to have a better understanding of afterlife and the way in which God goes about the justice, and also the notion that everyone would go back to God regardless of who they are and how they operated, and that shows the ultimate quality of mercifulness and unconditional love of God. Despite of the fact that this model would cause a lot of contradiction in a lot of different ways, there are many different levels and stages in Quran that mentioned multiple times that does not have any place in this model. For example, I'raf, Jannat, Ad, Rizwan, Yawmuddin, Yawmul Hisab, Yawmul Hasrat, Yawmul Hashr, Yawmul Nashr, Yawmul Qiyamah. These are all the different stages that we will discuss later. But I'll give you a little bit of explanation. So some of these stages would be different types of paradise, would be the day of judgment, but breaking down to the various stages, would be the future lives in which we are not bound by space dimension or time. None of these stages that are mentioned in Quran, for example, multiple times, they're not really adding up with the other model. In order for the whole process to work, we need to understand the model deeper. We took the Bible and Quran stories literally and didn't see the metaphors of them and read them more carefully. It resulted to a shallow and surface interpretation of certain notion, such as the notion that Adam was born on Earth, and that story doesn't add up to evolution. So the implication of the emphasis on looking at the monotheistic religion scripture as a factual book and not a metaphor for doing the best to communicate something esoteric that cannot be explained by logic and can be only explained through metaphors, and an aim to explain the phenomena beyond our comprehension. That would lead individuals to misinterpret the value and the underlying concepts of these stories and not being able to utilize them properly. So, one of the reasons that there are a lot of misinterpretation of a notion that somehow religion and science, or esoteric notions and science, are contradictory is based on this fact that individuals often misinterpret and look at the scriptures on a shallow level and taking the stories literal. So, understanding the fact that the Adam's creation is not happening on earth to expect the Adam and Eve to fall from the sky and boom, the creation starts and reproduction and the ecosystem as we know it. That certainly doesn't add up. So the understanding that Adam's creation is actually outside of the space-time dimension, and in fact, there are more subtleties into it, which I'm not going to get into it right now, but we will get into that pivotal moment of Adam's creation and the features and aspects that it had to have in order for all the philosophy and the design of creation to work. By taking a deeper look into the stories, by a divine revelations and epiphany that confirms it from the heart level, and being able to investigate that from a deeper level allows us to understand the value of the monotheistic scriptures and the teachings that we're aiming to offer to humanity. So many of these stages are important to discuss because it also gives us a better understanding of many other notions that there are references of. For example, in Quran, when we go through the scripture, all the angels prostrate before Adam except Iblis. And that's also same in Bible. So the story of Adam's creation, the forbidden fruit, and disobedience of Iblis will tell us a lot about the lives before, the process from the creation, throughout all the cycle up to the unification moment. So, considering that notion of angels all prostrated before Adam except Iblis, what would imply is that the angels, which are the agents of administrating the will of God, it's a metaphorical, poetic language to explain a phenomena which is beyond space and time or is beyond our comprehension within this physical life. So the implication of the prostration of the angels as the agents of God would imply and sync with the notion that each life we're going to lose a dimension and we become superior to that dimension and no longer bound by it. That's like an angel prostrating before us. So with each death and each drop of dimension, which was held by angels, we become dominant over that dimension and no longer limited by it. And that process would continue, and all the angels that are holding various different qualities of lives and operating at certain dimensions and certain necessities for specific experiences throughout this journey would all prostrate at the end but Iblis. And that it's telling us something really important, that even in a very, very last moment of unification, after all angels and dimensions dropped, he's still dealing with one, and that's opposition, which we'll discuss it later. It's a very, very important, pivotal moment. In fact, it's called the final trial. At the end of the cycle, Iblis does not prostrate, and that's where the final trial exists. And there is a challenge for us waiting, which requires us to gain the divine knowledge and the fundamental preparation for that quality, Kamal oriented knowledge, which we can carry to utilize in those circumstances. Understanding the dipolar universe, it will help us to know the operation of each of the elements of the creation, as well as having a better understanding of how to navigate this journey. We were introduced with positive and negative networks, which, in another term, more religious terms, are resembling Gabriel or Satan. which they are only following us up to hell, somewhere approximating here. After that, the process of the observer is not bound by these networks, or they're not dependent on their support. So there are some fundamental questions that we encounter. Going through all this process, knowing that we're going to go through all this cycle to gain an experience, and whatever that we decide and whatever that will happen to us, not only us, but in the past and the future, all those events are recorded in the protected tablet here. So the question is that, where is the free will? If everything is recorded in the protected tablet, implies that my next movement, my next decision, my next word is also there. And that could easily be misinterpreted as a predestination, and destiny being a forceful aspect that would dictate my actions and thoughts. But that's not true, because I can use my free will and change anything I want in any given moment and time. So, how does that add up with the notion that all of this is recorded in protected tablet? Let's say people need to make very important decisions of their life, what to study, what job they choose, going this way or going that way. If they are addicted, can they leave their substances? Can they kill themselves or not? Can they live more optimally? Can they make the environment polluted? Can they cause an illness for themselves or not? Can they hurt someone else or themselves or not? Can they become more responsible individual or not? All these questions are important to look at and examine the most fundamental principle that we are dealing with every day, and which is predestination and free will. A lot of individuals might assume that everything is based on fate, predestination, destiny, but we know that we have a lot of free will that we can use and shape our life and take responsibility of our actions and our decisions. So the notion that God is aware of all the decisions that we make, the notion that all those information is saved in protected tablet, does not mean that we are the puppets that is influenced by these written scriptures, and we are only just operating based on this predetermined factors. So let's discuss what are the nuances that we could still have all the information in a protective tablet, but have free will at the same time. So what happens is that because the protected tablet is recorded beyond space and time and opposition, in that 0 second, observed the entirety of this motion and recorded everything that happened. Whereas for the observer in motion, every stage from here and on happens in moments, depending on the quality and the dimensions that they are living in. So here right now in this life, we are experiencing moments by moments, and we have a notion of past and present and future. But if we go beyond time, then the past and the future and present collapses all in single moment. Then it feels eternal. It feels like we don't know how it started and we don't know if it's going to end. And the notion of the beginning or end would not have any definition. So then the question remains that what is predestination and what are the subtleties about it? How is it possible for all those information to be in the protected tablet and God knowing all our decisions that we will make, regardless of whether it's going to be in the next 5 minutes or 15 years or before we die or after we die. And how come we have the free will in every given moment to change it? So the protected tablet recorded everything beyond time. For this observer is observing it as it goes. So as we are going, to us as an emotion observer, that event of recording has not happened yet, if it was bounded by the dimensions and the limitations. But after we come out of this space and time dimension, then the information is already there, because there is no past or future. There is no time necessary for it to pass, to resolve. It's already passed and resolved. So the notion of beginning, processing, and ending collapses at once and becomes one. So in one way, we could say that we exist, we don't exist at the same time. It's like we started the journey, we have finished it, and we're journeying it at the same time in timelessness. Now, when it comes to predestination, destiny, or fate, there's two type of subcategories we can look into. The predestination that is known is something that obviously we can know of, and the unknown predestination is something we can't know. Now, there are certain notions that we can't know. No matter how much we try, we, for example, can't know the extra dimensions that we had previous life. There are certain factors that we could know. For example, um, let's say the certain notions that in the past could be considered as wrath of God, we could study them and avoid them. For example, flood or earthquake. What happens if we study the nature and be harmonious with nature? Then we would not build our houses where it's susceptible for earthquake or floods. So we would respect the operation of the nature and the process in which that it needs to go through to sustain life on earth. We would make our structure somewhere else. So then those necessary and organic natural process would not affect us in a destructive way for us to consider it a wrath of God, but rather it would be an appreciated, necessary aspects of life, because we know that without the earthquakes, without volcanoes, the life on Earth would not be possible. When it comes to free will, we need to understand that the existence of free will is so fundamental that if free will would be negated, then the entire philosophy of creation is under question. If the individuals would not have free will, would not be able to make decisions, would not be able to be responsible for their decisions, then they would not be judged based on their decisions. Because imagine a tree would be judged by being a certain tree and not the other. Well, it's predetermined based on their operation and programming, or an animal to behave in a certain way, and they can't go against that because they are pre-programmed in such a way. They don't have a free will. A lion doesn't have free will to become a tiger or to embody a rabbit attribute. They are programmed in such a way, and they don't have free will as we do. But humans are able to embody many attributes. They can be embodying attributes of a parasite. They can embody attributes of the viciousness of some animals, uh, being poisonous like other animals, some uh, greedy like other animals. So a lot of those attributes we can embody and act out, whereas other animals cannot. So the way in which we operate, based on the decisions we make, the way we exercise our free will, it would determine the harmonious and non-harmonious of our action. The more our awareness about universe increases, the amount of unknown predestination factors reduces and increases the amount of known predestinations. For example, many years ago, the earthquake would be a wrath of God, and people would give human sacrifices to stop that. Or many other natural circumstances, like eclipses, would be considered a wrath of God. And not many years ago, some tribes would make human sacrifice to stop the wrath of God. The more we go further, the more we become aware of the necessities, the whyness and howness of the operation of existence, the more the level of unknown predestination decreases. The more we understand how universe works, how the processes of evolution, not only on earthly level, but throughout the dipolar universe, the more we understand the circumstances. For example, in terms of our birth, some notions that are considered destiny and predetermined, like the place of our birth or the family that we are born into, these factors are completely predestined up to our knowledge now. But in Erfan Halgheh, we believe that we choose certain infants based on their T consciousness emission before entering the body, even though that we have no idea about the notion of a parent or a geographical consequences and so on and so forth, or what is rich or what is being poor. We get attracted by the T consciousness emission of an infant within, of a fetus within a mother's womb, and we choose that fetus and we come to life. So even the body that we are in right now, that could be perceived as an arbitrary circumstances, is actually based on our own decision, a decision that we made based on the awareness that we have, a level of awareness that we have to be attracted to certain emission over the other. Imagine like you're going to buy a car. If you're a knowledgeable person about cars, then you don't get distracted by a shiny, colorful appearance of the car, but rather you investigate the technical aspects of the car. Therefore, after the purchase and driving it, some years later, you would have less issues and less difficulties, and you have a more smoother and more quality of operation and experience. Whereas if someone does not have any knowledge of uh, vehicles, then they might just get distracted with some very surface level features that are not really guarantee quality and easy experience. So same type of decision was made when we were choosing the fetus that we came into, and now here we are. So the conscious observer coming from previous life before entering this world on earth, it observes the different fetuses on a consciousness level, not on a physical level that we are used to right now, and chooses one of the fetuses based on the features of the T consciousness that it has, and be attracted to one over the other and choose one based on their own attraction. So the individuals coming from previous life, based on their awareness, based on their understanding, they choose one of these fetuses. They become attracted to the emission of one of these fetuses, and they come through and experience the world through them. But after that they are born, they understand that the decision that they made had some consequences. For example, their family is poor or rich, or they have genetical issues or not, they're geographically poor or not. So before that choice, the individuals, the conscious observer doesn't have any idea of these notions, because these are the notions that have definition within this reality, whereas those informations are not self-evident. As much as you go to a auto mall and then you just look at a car, a lot of the information is about the issues with the engine, or the material they used, or so on and so forth, is not quite self-evident at the first glance. But then you might get attracted to one because you have some knowledge prior to that uh, encounter, or you merely just get attracted because it's just look pretty, and then, or look attractive, and then you pick it up, and then you realize that, oh, you might not have made a good decision, for example. So the more we become aware of the causality, whyness, and howness of aspects of existence, the more we become familiar with what are the predestinations, how they are, and so on. We learn this about the birth right now, and there is a notion of inshallah. For example, it says if God wills, or if God allows. And some individuals might ask, well, if I have the free will and if I'm willingly pursuing certain things, why still God needs to want, per se? So there are some subtleties to understand that goes with the will of God. And the will of God is usually interpreted as the God is kind of like sitting up there with a notebook and taking a note of all circumstances and responding appropriately. And if you do good things, and it gives you good marks, and if you ask something, you might give it to you, or you might not, because you had to do them anyways, so you don't get to really ask anything. But it's really ready to punish you at any moment. And anyway, but you ask this certain things, and it's taking a note, and then sometimes it's just arbitrarily have a good day and just allows you to have what you want, and sometimes it just make you suffer and then not giving you anything, even though that you were appreciating him or doing the things that he asked. And this is a type of relationship usually among with religious individuals, especially. What happens with that is that the individuals would, after a while, start to developing a lot of objections to the operation of God, and start questioning what is wrong with God. And it actually not only um, become a more quality relationship, it becomes more like a bitter one-way relationship that it never has a receptacle outcome. But what happens is that if we don't know the law of reflection, which I would like to actually go back to because we discussed it a few times. I mentioned that we're going to discuss it again and again because it's very important. Whatever we are enthusiastic about, we are sending that request up, and we might not be really aware of it a lot of the times. We get enthusiastic about many things and we might not really keep in track, but that's being recorded in a higher realm. And God is not really someone that is sitting somewhere with a notebook taking a record. It's all an intelligence that is created based on a system and an organization in 0 second and operating as a result. So, what is the will of God? So, the will of God is not this momentarily or arbitrary response at any given moment in time based on the notes that he took, is based on a will. The will of God becomes the laws and principles in which the entire creation is supposed to be created in that 0 second. And then there are rules within it. And there are a lot of if this, then that. It's kind of like algorithms. And these algorithms and laws, and it's an appropriate place for me to bring up, for example, when we talk about jabr. If you look at the word, it's actually the root of algebra. And algebra is a whole mathematic field that you probably learn in high school. His inventor is Khwarazmi. He was also a Muslim. And this is the al-jabr is actually an Arabic word. So it's a law, it's an enforcement, certain rules. And a lot of these rules are basically operating in a certain features in certain circumstances. So if this and then there are a lot of these operations that are designed within the creation in 0 second and being administrated by angels. And that is the particularity of the circumstances that we go through. And because we don't know it, it just seems arbitrary. We just look at it and it doesn't make sense to us. It's like I just throw you a bunch of formulas and like algebraic formulas. And if you really don't know the language, you just look at them blankly and then nothing makes sense. It's just some gibberish. The way that we interact with the natural laws is like that because we don't really understand how does it work, because the way that we understand things here is bound by space-time dimension and opposition. So anything that operates beyond space-time dimension and opposition is very, very hard. It's almost impossible for us to have an understanding of these notions, especially impossible from the step of logic. And that's why we emphasizing on the importance of having a knowledge that comes from a connection on a quality level to the world of ishq. And that experience would teach us and enlighten us and transform us from within, and has nothing to do with the level of individual's understanding. You might understand something right now on a logical level. That doesn't guarantee your inner standing or innate comprehension of it, but your inner comprehension of it would guarantee your logical understanding. Definitely. It's like if you never had Apple and try to understand what Apple is based on me introducing it to you by certain words and charts and PowerPoints, and try to explain it and try to live by the awareness of if there is such a fruit existing, is much different experience wanting to explain it and live by that other than just having a bite of it. Just the simple experience of having a bite of an apple suddenly give you the all confidence and knowledge of what apple is, that no matter how many years or how many hours of logical interpretation or comprehension you went through, you're able to um, ex- express it and explain it and as live with it as an experience, carrying with you. So that's the difference between more like a conventional approach to learning something and becoming aware of something, or contemplating something, than doing that in Erfan Halgheh. Because in Erfan Halgheh, we are not relying or depending on an individual's abilities or skills or capabilities. And we will get to that in a moment. It's the last topic that we're going to discuss. But just to wrap up, in regards to what we are discussing, our enthusiasm is being recorded in the memory of existence, goes to the higher realm, goes through filters and natural laws, and they will deliver it intelligently. It's like an AI system, is like a spiritual quality AI system created by God that everything already knows how to operate under any given circumstances within that platform, because all of that that's supposed to happen is already happened and done and resolved and finished in a timelessness already. So this is already done. We are not here. from God's perspective. So none of this actually exists. It exists now because we are in it. If you're outside of it, it doesn't exist. It's already past. And it never happened. So it never started. It is processing, going through it, and it's done and is finished all at the same time. And as you can see, it's a very complicated but very simple at the same time. And the reason that there are so many contradictions is because those qualities are beyond time, opposition, and space, and that's why it makes it difficult to explain it with words, because the words are only able to explain anything from the uh, degree of the black to the white. So anything beyond that, we don't have words for it. So we need to just explain it to the contradiction. If something is not good or evil, or if something is not black or white, or if something is not multiplicity or unity, then we can't really say anything about it. We can just still using other words to get closer to it, but still not be it. So that experience gives us something that is beyond the limitation of our mental and our logical comprehension. And we are able to understand it in a different level. Our mind is capable of perceiving those supramental processes. So when we talk about the will of God, if God wills, inshallah, it means that if it's aligned with the natural laws, if it's aligned with all the different things that I'm not aware of, and then it will happen. So it's like an acknowledgement of there is a higher intelligence that is precisely and carefully calculating everything and administrating it all. And we trust that if something happens, then is within that platform of operation aligned. And if something doesn't happen, then still there is a reason for it. And that doesn't mean that someone should avoid doing something and not taking responsibility of not pursuing it willful enough and say like, okay, God didn't want it. So that's what we're talking about is very subtle, and we will elaborate on it more and more to not having misunderstandings of that notion, because individuals easily fall for one extreme or the other. So they say like, okay, if God doesn't want, then they put effort, and they don't want it hard enough, and they give up and then blame it on God's will. Or some things happen that they could make a better decisions, they blame it on God's will. That's not how it works. Anything that is reflected back is our enthusiasm. Now, there are also subtleties that not anything that we ask will be granted, because it might be against some of the natural laws. The more and more we go further, the more we understand the subtleties. Is not we would not have enough time in one session or two for me to able to explain all the subtleties, and that's why we go through them throughout the course, especially in third course. We explain many of the natural laws, and within those discussions we become more aware of the subtleties. I encourage you to study The Human Worldview, which is a great book by Dr. Muhammad Ali Tari, which is around various different natural laws. It's a short book. It's not very dense. It's kind of compressed. It's a short read. It gives you a lot of good preparation for getting to that discussions a little deeper. I really encourage you to study The Human Worldview, which is around the natural laws. It would give you a good foundation for a deeper discussions of natural law and better understanding, where we have discussions alike this one, to have more preparations to understand them better. Let's do a tesal for a few minutes, and then we continue our discussion. Thank you. So the moment of creation, first of all, why God needed to create. God didn't create it as a result of a need, because that would imply that God was needy, and that becomes a deficient aspects of God. It goes against the ultimate aspects of God, and it basically becomes contradictory to the definition of God. So the reason that God created was out of ishq. It wanted to share this ishq with another being that was capable of experiencing and comprehending and understanding what that is, and to become just like God. So, in order for that to happen, there were a lot of necessities. One was free will. Despite of that free will, it has to have a platform to go through the experiences of moments by moments, gaining the experiences as a result of that free will. And being able to exercise that free will would need a platform that you could exercise between one or two or three or more factors, which opens up multiverses and parallel universes. I'm not going to get into that. So then, this being that's supposed to be capable of becoming God, it was not in a way that you just make something like yourself. It's like you're making something that has the capacity of becoming yourself, but you're not enforce it. So you just make them make the decisions on their own. So then they become experienced. So they experience what it is. So first, it gave us all the names, all the attributes of God. He breathed his spirit to our existence. We had all the knowledge. We were in paradise. But because we were like a child, not knowing what to do with it, we had to go through an experience to become aware how to utilize that essence of God. Then the essential reason, which was free will, the essential factor, which was free will, was given to Adam in the notion that do not get close to the tree. The notion that do not get close to the tree implies that you could get close to the tree. Otherwise, God could just create Adam incapable of getting closer to the tree, or no tree. And that would resolve the whole situation. So the fact that God told him to not to do it implied that he could. So he was tempted, and he did. He was tempted by Iblis, saying that if you have a bite of that fruit, you would be eternal just like him. And he was right. So the factor of disobedience in one hand, the curiosity and the temptation of becoming one or becoming just like God, in another hand, Adam decides to take a bite of the apple and go through the journey despite of being fallen from paradise. And being fallen from paradise would imply that he's going to be limited. So then he could practice those free wills under certain challenging circumstances. And that becomes the challenge between good and evil in a mysterious manner, in which that you don't remember what was the purpose of your creation. You don't know what decision you should make, because that would go contradictory to the notion of free will. Because if there is an exam and I'm giving you the answers, then there is no exam. So the mysterious factor of it should remain. And then there should be some challenging factors. So then the enthusiasm of the individuals toward whether I want or how much I want to embody or access those attributes would be also under question. And that's where the beginning of the creation implies giving certain features to Adam, which is Eve. Eve is not a woman, and Adam is not a man. These events happen in a timelessness, a spacelessness state. There is no gender in there, which the misinterpretation of this notion, this limitation of dual aspects of our understanding, that if there is a figure, it either has to be man or a woman. It didn't allow us to comprehend the scripture beyond its physicality and understanding that it's just telling us a story about an event that happened somewhere else out of the earth. So it's not necessarily need to be abiding by the rules of space-time dimension, and that causes a lot of misunderstanding throughout the history. Now, what happens is that this being is capable of embodying the attribute of God. It's carrying it within its existence, and it's going through certain challenging stages in which it gives him an opportunity or her an opportunity. Well, it comes here and takes the gender, but Adam doesn't have a gender, and it's very hard to explain it in English because there are pronouns that you always have to choose between man and woman, but in Farsi, for example, we don't have that. So you can talk about something without specifying a gender, which is, I think it's very great when you talk, which it allows you to talk about timelessness aspects quite easily without having to give that notion of gender and division in that sense. So this creation is capable and is going through this cycle, gaining certain experiences and making decisions, align or misalign. And at the end, it goes through the hell, and the hell becomes this stage that it burns everything that is between God and Him, and then goes through paradise, just some apprenticeship stages that we are able to actually manipulate the reality and actually create some things just like God. And then we get all at the very, very top moment, and we just um, becoming just like God. We have almost everything as like God. And then the final challenge is that now that you have all the information, now that you're just like me, now that I gave you everything that I had, are you going to be with me or are you going to be on your own? And that's the final challenge. If we say that, yes, I'm going to be with you, we merge, we become one with, then that's the poetry that Rumi says, هست از پس پرده گفتگوی من و تو کان پرده برافتد نه تو مانی و نه من. Our conversation is only behind the curtains. If that curtain drops, there is neither you nor me. So the notion of me or you would not exist because the merge happened. So then there is no me or you, there is only one. So for us to say that what happens afterwards is as if we explaining that experience from a different observer. But if you become one with God, then you're God. Then you're no longer an independent observer abiding or dominated by certain dimensions. And that's where the experience of being one with God comes in importance, which we can have through the connections. If you have enthusiasm and use the halqehs, you could have experiences that it gets us closer and closer to that experience of being one with God. And after that, we are just God experiencing that experience. But what happens if we say no? What happens if we say no is that it becomes the beginning. Don't get close to that tree. It becomes like in the beginning. It's like the beginning of the movie is the end of the movie, and the end of the movie is the beginning. And that's what happens in the cycle. So if we say no, now that I got like God, we almost don't even remember or don't recognize the necessity of being one with God. It's like, I don't know who you are, I'm God. Who are you? And he would be like, don't have a bite off from that forbidden fruit. And that's basically becomes another experiences of a cycle, which we can go through it again, but from the beginning, like restart. And that basically becomes a new experience with all new platforms and nothing just like before. And that becomes another opportunity for the observer to go through experiences, gain enough Kamal oriented and unity oriented knowledge so that we would say yes to the final trial, merge with God. There's a lot of subtleties in it. I'll just spoil the movie for you. I just gave you the whole story, summary of the story, but there are so many nuances and details that it happens, determines a lot of that answer, and we will learn about the importance of Kamal oriented, unity oriented awareness and knowledge, that ma'rifat that we say. The ma'rifat is divine knowledge. Ma'rifat is an Kamal oriented knowledge that allows us to recognize and become aware of that philosophy of creation, the ultimate level of operation in alignment with the philosophy of creation. That knowledge is transferable. That knowledge would help us to remember or under any circumstances that we won't merge with God and we don't self proclaim God, forgetting that everything we had is from God. And that requires practice, because imagine here we are very needy beings, we are very limited. If you're not capable of uniting with God in the levels in which we can, in this humble limit, imagine if you are an actual God, you're experiencing it, and some other being shows up and asks you if you want to be humble enough to merge. And then if you're not Kamal oriented, we can say like, who are you? We are already God. You need to merge with us or with me. I'm not going to merge with you. I'm my own God. So that causes the division. The nature of God is something unknowable. And it is one of the most important topics in Erfan Halgheh. It's trying to understand what God is. God is an existence that is ineffable. So God and its essence is ineffable existence, as opposed to explainable existence. Whatever that we think of, whatever that we can explain by any mean, that becomes explainable existence. And God is ineffable existence. It's a type of existence that it doesn't have an existence, because existence itself would imply a layer or a shadow or an image of the owner of the existence. So imagine if you're standing in front of the mirror or your shadow, even though that is giving evidence of your existence, but it's illusory. So anything other than yourself in that relationship would be illusory. Your picture in the mirror, your shadow are illusory. Anything that we see in the world of existence, falling on the subcategories of explainable existence, is the shadow or the image of God. Any shadow or image has the owner, and that owner is truth in comparison to that illusion. All the universe, anything that exists in an explainable category, would be the shadow or the illusory existence as opposed to the truth. Now, understanding that anything that exists also have another shadow, another image, and that can continue to the infinite positive and infinite negative, which would have this the fractal chain-like effect of creation. But despite of that infinite continuity, we still have to have an initial moment. And that initial moment is the manifestation of a source, is an image or a shadow of a truth. And that has to be absolute. So there can be only one absolute truth that is independent from anything else, and anything that exists and manifests, it goes back to that. That essence is the divine essence of God. which is the only absolute truth of existence, and anything else falls under the illusory, the shadow, and the image of that existence. Anything that we see in the universe, anything that we can think of, they're all showing, giving a sign from that truth, that absolute truth. They are all indicating the existence, pointing out to the existence of that absolute truth. So nothing in this universe is empty from truth. There is a beautiful poetry that it says that anywhere that you look, there is a hidden observer that you can't say where it is and where it's not. هر جا نگری جلوه‌گه شاهد غیبی است. او را نتوان گفت کجا هست و کجا نیست. Or the notion that there's only one truth that is absolute, and anything else is relative and only an image or an illusion in relationship to that absolute truth. Just like the light that we see from the moon reflected from the sun. We cannot directly look at the light of the sun. It makes us blind. We observe that light through the moon. And that light is indicating the existence of an absolute truth, which is God. There's another beautiful poetry. It says that just like light that is separate from the moon, and it's not, the entire world is the signs of God, but is not God. When you see your image in the mirror, the image of yours, it is the image of you, and it's not. چون نور که از مهر جدا هست و جدا نیست، عالم همه آیات خدا هست و خدا نیست. در آینه بینی چو اگر صورت خود را، آن صورت آینه شما هست و شما نیست. This understanding of the essence of God, anything that could be done by our limitation would not be the essence of God. It would be always limited and only a shadow or a reflection. The divine essence of God is beyond explanation, beyond understanding and comprehension in any level. The only thing that we can know of is the existence and knowing Him through these manifestations, reading the book of existence, the book of His divine signs. And from the understanding that every manifestations is pointing at to one of the shadows or images of God, it indicates and testify His divine existence. So the beingness of God, the existence of God, is different than the type of beingness or an existence that we can be familiar with. What we know as existence, what we understand as beingness, is way different than the essence of God. So, in order for us to address God more appropriately, we develop some words like Adam or Hiç or Hiç Qutbi or non-polar. Adam is not Adam. You will see this word in many Sufi and many Arif poetries throughout the Persian history. You see Hiç everywhere in Rumi's shrine if you go. And all they're indicating the notion that we cannot give any attribute to God whatsoever and not belittling God. So any aim to define God, you're actually belittling God. You're making it limited. You're making it smaller for our understanding. The same notion as Subhanallah amma yasufun. Subhanallah is like we are floating in it. but we cannot give it attribute. It's like everything is God and we are floating in God, we are moving through God, but we cannot give it attribute. And that's also a reference in Quran. So God, the true existence of God, cannot be named, cannot be pointed at, cannot be think of. Anything that we come up would be just a manifestation, one of the thousands of infinite manifestation that are equally valuable because they're all carrying the essence of God. That Adam, that Heech, that unmanifested consciousness, that unmanifested existence, that non-polar existence does not have name or attributes and is ineffable, and we cannot understand it and get close to it in any way. And that's the definition of true God. The next topic we're going to discuss is the principle in which that we approach a spiritual journey in Erfan. It is a very important topic because it explains a lot about the differences between any other schools of thoughts, anything that has been out there in human history, difference of those with Erfan Halgheh. It explains the unique aspects of Erfan Halgheh comparing to any other approach or school of thought, and also clarify the way in which we should approach the spiritual journey if we choose Erfan Halgheh. In order for us to understand the differences and nuances in terms of journeying on a spiritual journey, we subcategorize the spiritual individuals in few subcategories. There are 4 subcategories of spiritual individuals in regards to the way that they approach their journey. The first type is self-reliant, self-oriented. The second one is self-oriented, God-reliant. The third one is God-reliant, self-oriented. And the fourth one is God-reliant, God-oriented. So what does this mean? If we ask someone that they're walking in a spiritual journey about their goal, some might say that their goal is to have some sort of a personal quality accomplishment, whether that's a higher state of being, peace, happiness, being able to live in a higher quality and a higher state, and that's their goal. And if we ask, how are you gonna go about it? How are you trying to acquiring those qualities? They say like, well, I'll put my effort, I do certain practices, I do meditation, I do concentration, imagination, certain retreats, something to do with an individual's um, physical operation. The second type, we ask them what is their goal, and their goal be something along the lines of the first one. So happiness, peace, more elevation of an inner quality, and feelings that are positive. And if we ask them, how are you going to do it? They say like, well, I'm going to ask the help from God. The third one are the individuals that are having the goal of their spiritual path to be closeness with God. And if we ask them how they're going to go about it, they say, well, I'm going to rely on those efforts, enthusiasm, again, meditation or visualization or any endeavor on a personal level. The fourth one, if you ask what is your goal in a spiritual journey, they say the closeness to God, becoming with one with God, and having inner comprehension, understanding of of God and being one with. And if you say, how are you going to do it? They say like, well, I'm relying on God's help. I'm surrendering to God's help. Now, if we examining these terms for each of these individuals, there are circumstances that the individuals are seeking some personal benefits or personal gain, regardless of what that is on a personal level. And that's it. Not necessarily a unification with God or oneness with God or closeness to God. And that's where it ends. So if they get to peace or if they get to happiness, whatever that means for them, then that's where their spiritual journey ends. And they basically continue going about those certain routines that they find it productive or helpful. There are other there are other general categories which the goal is to become close to God and have an understanding of God and becoming closer. The difference between these two approaches is that one is self-oriented, self-relying, which wants something for personal gain and relies on their own ability. The second one is still want everything for themselves, but they depending and relying on God. So they try to get it from God. The other ones are putting their goal as a higher aim to become one with God. And is one word, being one with God, what does that mean? But it's like if you would want to ask something, imagine you put the highest number, let's say 100 in this case, for the sake of argument. If you ask 10 and you're satisfied with 10, well, you stopped yourself. You still were capable of going 90 more, but you were satisfied with 10. So, okay, 10 it is. Or maybe like that's the highest optimal situation. Usually people are managing to get like 6 or 7. Now, if someone says that I'm not aiming for that 10, I'm aiming for something that you can't really define at first, but contains everything else. So the 10 and the 20 and the 30 and 50 up to 100, if you aim for the highest, then everything else just comes with it. You don't even need to pursue or ask for it. So putting the goal as limited as anything to do with an individual level not only limits the individuals away from their highest capacity, but also they are limiting themselves to the knowledge in which they can't really carry after death. And then they're also limiting themselves as a result of their own limitations. But when someone is aiming for God and also relying on God, then is having the highest aim in both ways. So Erfan Halgheh is the path that is a God oriented, God reliant, which means that anything that we try to achieve on a quality level, we are not relying on anything to do with it on an individual level. So we use Halqehs, and that's basically using the help of God. What is the goal of it? The goal is not those specific individual qualities, it comes with it. So the goal of Faradarmani, as we mentioned before, is not healing. Healing is a consequence of Faradarmani, which is unconditionally given in many circumstances. But the goal is not that. The goal of Faradarmani is to become aware, to first become introduced with interuniversal consciousness, then to become aware of the existence of it from a heartfelt confirmation, then it making individuals enthusiastic to pursue the implication of the existence of this interuniversal T-consciousness network. So then by pursuing the implication of this intelligence, the individuals are stepping into the path of Kamal and they're learning about the natural laws, how the universe is made, how it's operating, what is the philosophy of its creation, how can we become aligned with it. And all those aims are also being administered and facilitated by the help of God. And what the only thing requires from individuals to become engaged and impartial observer and enthusiastic throughout the process, and that's all. For the operation of the halqa itself, it doesn't need enthusiasm to be established. What it needs enthusiasm is to utilize and embody the quality shifts that the individuals are being introduced to or experience through the halqas by the engagements and utilizations of the halqas, and uh, putting their efforts to become aligned from the parts that they can exercise their free will. So considering Erfan that has two general opposite subcategories, one Erfan of Kamal and one Erfan of power, it is possible to say that individuals in the spiritual path could be encountering both of these experiences, and it is important to be able to distinguish them. But when we talk about ma'rifat, or the divine knowledge, we are specifically talking about the acquirement of any knowledge that is in the domain of Kamal and not power. So any spiritual powers in terms of mind reading, character reading, future telling, any type of spiritual powers as such, for any circumstances or any reason, even for even with the best of intention, would still fall under the Erfan of power, and that would basically render it coming from negative intelligence network and would have consequences. Here, we believe that without divine knowledge, without ma'rifat, humans would remain in pain, confusion, loneliness, and their identity would not be formed in harmonious with the existence. And the lack of aligned and solid identity, it caused individuals to constantly be in a state of confusion or contradictory operation. So one day they're this way, the other day they're that way, and every circumstances comes, they just change to those circumstances and they don't really know what is the actual truth, and everything could be truth. And it is a new notion, is a quite contrary notion, an unfortunate one. And now people are getting offended so easily. So, in order for us to be politically correct and not hurting anyone's feelings, somehow we need to agree that everything could be truth, even though that the truth could be contradictory. And somehow that view is widely accepted among um, many individuals, some claiming to be on a spiritual journey. And that notion causes individuals to not have one defined direction. And somehow you can take any alley or a street and be sure that you're going to get to the destinations that you intend to, if you keep your intentions straight. So that idea leads individuals to the notion that everyone can have their version of the truth and there is no objective truth. Not having an objective truth, it implies that there are many different gods, basically. So the implication of the lack of objective truth is polytheism. The reason is that if there is one set of rules, is like you're playing a game with a certain rules. Let's say you're playing a basketball. You can't play basketball and kick the ball with your feet or just grab the ball and run. You could, that will not be basketball anymore. Or you can't play soccer and then start using your hands playing. So each of these games has its own specific rules of the game, which are contradictory to the others. Understanding that there cannot be infinite objective truth based on every individual's interpretation of what truth is, then imply that there is only one objective truth that we should put time to understand and comprehend it thoroughly, because that's the fundamental operation, the fundamental necessities for us to become aware, how does this universe work, and how can we go throughout our life that we are violating the natural laws less and less, and we are more harmonious with the natural laws. And these are the notions that we need to have an inner standing through a heartfelt confirmation, through our revelations and epiphanies, and not just merely depending on someone else's words. And that's what the importance of Erfan Halgheh is, to allow individuals to use the Halghehs and have these revelations and epiphanies uh, uh, regarding these notions that we talk about. So you're just not relying on my words or Dr. Tari's words, I should say, uh, to believe that this is true or not. So you can experience it. We bring it forward as it's been received and revealed to Dr. Tari and experienced by many other individuals, including me, allowing and inviting individuals to come and experience it for themselves and investigate it for themselves. So in Irfan Halqeh, which is a path that is God oriented and God reliant, anything that we are aiming, we're relying on God's help, and our ultimate goal is also God. Anything else is a mean for that journey, for that goal, and for that aim. It is important to consider that understanding the natural laws and being aware of them, we become more familiar with the mind of the Creator, knowing why the things are the way they are, and being able to aim for such an operation that allows us to live harmoniously with everything else around us, with nature, with other beings, and brings us together, united on a quality level, not on the quantity level. Because there is the notion of quality unity and quantity unity. The quantity unity would basically be people living beside each other with different opinions and different ideas and not killing each other or hurting each other. That's the definition of unity on a quantity level. The quality level unity cannot be achieved if individuals are not heartfully agreeing on one sets of principles, all the rules of the game, in another word. So if you want to play it well together, you need to agree on the same rules of the game, not forcefully, not logically, but by heart. And that's only achievable through understanding and experiences. And that's the consequences of halghehs, utilizing them and experiencing them. The spiritual experiences, epiphanies, thoughts, illuminations, revelations, they're all are different phenomena and aspects of existence that would fall under one or other category, which is either it would fall under the Erfan of Kamal or Erfan of power. It would either leads us toward unity orientation, the knowledge of Kamal, and understanding the natural laws and the experiences of notions related to the understanding of philosophy of creation and our purpose in the universe, or it would distract us and gives us a superiority orientation or a notion that would separate us from others or makes us deviated and attracted toward abilities that we can show off with or feel superior to others with, and cause division that would not lead an harmonious operation and would not be aligned for the unity on a collective level. Another important topic I would like to discuss as the last discussion we're going to have is the cross law. This law is very important. We talked about it a few times. I'm going to talk about it again because it's very important, and it completes our discussions about the knowledge of Kamal and knowledge of power, and how can we differentiate one from the other. We can differentiate them from their fruit, and that's either amplification of a positive state or a negative state. It is impossible for someone to have an aligned spiritual experience, closeness to God, and feel anxious or feel fear or feel hopelessness or loneliness. It is impossible for individuals to have negative experiences or feelings experiencing something from positive network. So the cross law is predicating on an idea that positive and negative awarenesses would have positive and negative amplification of their state, and it would either toward unity and Kamal or toward power and superiority. And we discussed some of the filters that it's on the way of the information that comes from positive network, which the information should not be adversarial to justice, confidentiality, Kamal, free will, and etc. And we also discussed about the consequences of these awarenesses coming from each of these networks. So based on cross law, if information comes from positive awareness, it should give us a positive state. It should amplify that state. It should be about the awareness toward recognition, comprehension, and understanding of Kamal, philosophy of creation, the mystery of Genesis, discovery of existential value of the self, the treasure box of beloved's attribute that we carry within us, the awarenesses about the unity of existence, the notion of al-haq, or I am the truth, the notion of jamal yar, the presence, the purposefulness of creation, and experiences as such. Even though these names, some of them are in Farsi or in Arabic, when you have these experiences, you would have the inner knowing that this is what that is. So having the T consciousness network operating beyond space, time, and opposition, it goes beyond the limitations of language, and it would elaborate and illuminate and reveal some of these quality interpretations and understanding of the words on that level, and you would know what they mean when you experience them. Contrary, a negative awareness and negative network would give the knowledge of power that allows individuals to show off and uh, general superiority, anything that puts individuals superior to others, achieving earthly goals or personal benefits, and anything that would be a power probing into others, mind reading, foreseeing future, personality reading, etc. So the cross law would gives us a good framework to work with whenever we want to understand whether the awareness, epiphany, revelations that we received is whether Kamal oriented from positive network or power oriented from negative network. I hope that was helpful. Please let me know if you receive any information and you're not sure about how to filter it. You can always write to me, and then I will get back to you. I can elaborate on those if you need help. Before we end, let's do 15 minutes اتصال. You can choose what you would like to use. It could be Faradarmani, General Link 1 or 2, or it could be any of the halqas that you received in second course.